Hello, this is Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. I had put a video on models of memory as a sample ERQ. Once I put that video, I got messages from students asking me to go stepwise into discussing an ERQ. I had asked you in that video whether you would like me to cover a specific ERQ as a sample of how you score on an ERQ. And that is what you've wanted. So this is a requested video. I've taken another ERQ this time. I've taken a Neurotransmitters ERQ. In the previous video, I had mentioned that most students opt for cognitive ERQs in their paper. But yes, I have come across quite a few students who opt for biological as well. It's the second most popular choice, I would say. So since I've already shared an ERQ on memory, I thought it would be good to take one from the biological approach, and this one has come on the latest paper. That is why I have selected it. May 2024 paper. The biological ERQ was on neurotransmitters effect on behavior. So we will do a walkthrough. This is going to be a lengthy video. I will point out many things about how you should be writing an ERQ. Right from how you should be interpreting the question to how you should be putting down the answer. Using this one as an example, this is a high scoring answer. It falls in the highest mark band. So this is 1 out of 22 marks. It would have easily scored 21 or 22. So this would be a good way of learning how to write our ERQs. Okay, let's begin. When we see an ERQ question, we know the first thing we have to make note of is what is the command term that has been used. When the command term is discuss, how we have to interpret is that we have to give a range of arguments. That is the first thing that should come to our mind. Okay, now this should be the most obvious thing, but unfortunately it is not. There are so many answers that we go through which don't have any argument. Students just memorize some format that they have to explain the topic that has been asked in the question, so they have to explain the meaning and importance of neurotransmitters, and then they have some formulaic way of writing, such as that they have to follow the general explanation with 2 studies and critically evaluate each study. That is not a helpful way of answering at all, and it will never bring you to the highest mark band. You cannot have a fixed structure on how to deal with every answer. What you should be preparing when you're preparing your answer for a discuss ERQ is what arguments you want to give. Your answer must have arguments, and it must have a range of arguments, so you can't give a single one. Now, what differentiates a discuss question from an evaluate question is we do not have to be balanced in our view. Undoubtedly, a superior answer does cover both pros and cons of a topic when it comes to arguments, but it need not be balanced. If we want, we can be more critical of the topic in question, or if we want, we can be more supportive of the topic. So these are the 2 things we need to keep in mind when we see the discuss command term. Many students also fail to understand what an argument is. An argument is just a point that you are making about the topic, so it has to be relevant to the topic. You can literally take it as a point of discussion. Some students misinterpret it as argument has to be critical in nature. It has to put down the topic which is there. It has to be critical of the topic, so to say. Not necessary. An argument can be in favor of the topic. What is important is, since let's take neurotransmission is such a broad topic, you have to be specific and make explicit which aspects of neurotransmitters are you going to be dealing with. That makes for your argument. Okay, so first, when you see the discuss command term, in your mind, be sure of how many arguments and which arguments you want to give. So mentally just outline your arguments and which studies you will use to bring about the arguments. Now, one question that immediately comes to mind is how many arguments should be there? I would recommend 3. In my opinion, that makes for a good range. It's not too less, it's not just 1 when a range has been asked for. At the same time, it's not very excessive. What happens is if you have too many arguments, if you take 5 or 6 arguments, you end up compromising on the depth with which you cover each argument. So your answer takes a breadth rather than a depth approach, and that becomes problematic because then you're not able to show, you don't have enough scope to show critical thinking adequately. Your critical thinking becomes very limited. So to not lose out on the criteria of critical thinking and showing elaborate knowledge, I would suggest that you restrict yourself to 3 arguments and explain them thoroughly. So this is the first thing to interpret in the question. Next is to read the question very carefully. Some students just read the keyword, which is neurotransmitters. Undoubtedly, that's the most important thing. But when they say on human behavior, this is equally important, that you have to have some specific behaviors that you are going to be discussing in the answer. So it cannot be very general that you don't have any behavior, you never point out or link to any behavior. That should not be the case. With every argument you make, which behavior that particular neurotransmitter is influencing should be very, very clear to the examiner. This we'll understand better as we go through the answer. So this is how we need to interpret the question. I'll just summarize. First, give due importance to the command term. Next, make sure you read the entire question, and in your mind you're prepared with, I would suggest 3 arguments for each of which you know which study you are going to give in support. Next, what we have to consider is how should our introduction be structured. When it comes to the introduction, like I said, we should not take a very generic approach and very formulaically just go on describing what are neurotransmitters, give examples of neurotransmitters and go on talking about which behaviors they influence in a way that is not going to be relevant to the rest of the answer. In other words, don't just memorize from the textbook which neurotransmitters are there and which behaviors they affect in general and go on writing that. That really takes away from the focus of the answer. If you see, the very first criterion for scoring in an ERQ is focus on the question, right? You know that. So in the ERQ rubric you have seen, focus on the question is very important. So if you are not focusing on the question, rather you're going on giving generic points which are not going to be of any use in the rest of the answer, then your answer is rather unfocused and you're not meeting the first criterion. So in the introduction, again there are different ways of writing it. I would suggest, yes, you do begin with the meaning of the general concept. So here I have begun with, what are neurotransmitters? They are chemical messengers of the brain. That helps define it. But then we don't go on just revolving around what neurotransmitters are meaninglessly, just to show that we have memorized well from the textbook. Immediately we connect it to the question. So that influence human behavior, and then we immediately begin with the first argument. What you see here is the first argument, very importantly, explained. Okay, so in the introduction, without wasting any time, I have a set of 3 arguments in total, like I mentioned in the beginning. The very first one I have placed in the introduction. Another approach could be just to name the 3 arguments first, which I had done in the memory ERQ. You can put it that way also. What is important is to be focused on the question. When you begin off with an argument or you place your 3 arguments in the introduction, you are being highly focused on the question because that is the requirement in discuss. That is why we straight off head to the argument instead of giving general points about neurotransmitters. So my very first argument here is that neurotransmitter levels fluctuate as people engage in different behaviors. So then the argument is, or the relevant question is, how do they influence behavior? This is the central argument which I am making first. Now, I could leave it at this and I could directly come to the study. So how do they influence behavior is shown by the study by Martinez and Kesner. But I don't do that. Why don't I do that? Because the requirement of the criterion, if we look into focus on the question, if we want to score in the mark band of 2, that is if we want 2 out of 2, we have to explain the problem in the question. So if I just describe the problem, if I just leave it at this, I meet the 1 mark band because I've just identified the question. I've been asked to explain the problem. I've been asked to explain it, not to just identify it. That's why I need to elaborate further and I need to explain what do I mean by how do they influence behavior. Okay, this is the biggest mistake students do. In fact, in some resources, I would not like to name them, students have brought it to my notice that it is mentioned that when you see an ERQ question, the first thing you do is restate the question, just put it down into an affirmative sentence. That is not the approach to be taken, or that should just be the preliminary thing that you do. Immediately after that, you must elaborate upon and explain the argument that you are making. You have to give more details on the argument. It cannot be a one-liner. So when I say how they influence behavior, what I'm trying to discuss is, are they simply correlated with behavior? Is it that something from the environment influences a person such that his behavior and his neurotransmitter functioning is affected at the same time? Or is it that neurotransmitters are the causes of human behavior? Is it because neurotransmitters are released that people start engaging in certain behavior? So this is what I mean by asking the question, how do they influence behavior? I have explained that I want to look into, are neurotransmitters simply correlated to behavior, or are they causing behavior? This is how we explain the problem. So here I hope your first biggest myth is dispelled. In the first criterion, focus on the question. When they ask you to explain the issue raised in the question, they do not want you to explain what neurotransmitters are generally, or to give specific examples of them, or for you to say why they are important. They want you to explain the argument that you are making regarding neurotransmitters. Further, I have also explained, to make a link to the study, that when it comes to seeing whether neurotransmitters are causes of human behavior, animal studies have been used because they have the advantage of being conducted in highly controlled environments. When it comes to animals, we can literally cage them down in a place, not allow them to do anything unnecessary, just manipulate their neurotransmitters and see whether that is influencing their behavior. This is the reason why animal studies are used instead of human studies. Why I'm making these points? Because one, they are connected to the argument I have made above, because they're talking about cause-effect relations. Secondly, because I'm going to follow up with an animal study which is going to highlight my argument further. One thing is, in your ERQ, just like your SAQ, you have to be consistently linking one point to the next. Nothing in your ERQ can be random or out of place. Every point that you make has to be connected to the previous. So when I'm going from a broader argument into a specific study, I have to show how that study is coming in that place, what justifies using that study for that particular argument. So that is what I have done by pointing out why animal research is used in the case of neurotransmitters. One more thing is, though I have not come across this, but many examiners do say that when it comes to neurotransmitters, lots of students get confused and they start talking about hormones instead of neurotransmitters. So their answers would be about oxytocin or testosterone or estrogen. Make sure you're not making that mistake. Otherwise, you'll completely lose marks, not only focus of the question, also in research studies criterion, also in your knowledge criterion, because then your answers become totally irrelevant. You're not answering the question at all. So make sure you know the difference between neurotransmitters, hormones and pheromones. Coming back to the answer, another thing that is relevant here is I have introduced the Martinez and Kesner study. Now many students ask, do we have to cite the year of the study? You do not have to cite the year. In fact, even citing the names of the authors is not compulsory. But I do suggest that you just state their names. I don't insist on the years. That is my approach. It can be very difficult to remember so many years across so many studies. But I feel taking the effort of remembering the name of the researchers is worthwhile, because it's almost as if it is the title of the study. We don't really see what is the title. We just remember the name of the researchers. We just call it the Martinez and Kesner study. So actually we're not just memorizing names, it's a way of referring to the study. That's why I suggest you remember the names. Now whenever we are using a study to support an argument, we first need to describe the study. It helps show knowledge also, and it helps to make it clear to the examiner exactly why the study is in support of the argument. So we need to say something about what is done in the study. From a marking point of view, whenever we cover a study, we are meeting the requirements of criterion C. Right? Focus on the question was criterion A, which I have explained to you. Also criterion B is met, knowledge and understanding, because when we explain an argument, we are showing knowledge and understanding. Knowledge and understanding are never differentiated in the marking criteria, if you see. So knowledge is not independent of understanding. Again, if I would have just left it as how do they influence behavior and I would have not elaborated further, that would have shown I just have information. I don't have knowledge. I don't know what this argument means. Because I have explained it fully, it shows that I have knowledge about what the argument is. So I score on criterion B as well. I fall in the 5 to 6 mark band. Now coming to criterion C. In criterion C, we are expected to firstly, very importantly, give relevant psychological research. Also, we have to develop the argument. Equally important is to develop the argument with help of the study. Now, a number of things to discuss here. One, if I'm taking an animal study like I have, it is relevant to the question made only and only if I can link the results to humans. If I just write an animal study and I do nothing about it, I just leave it as it is, which students do in their formulaic approach when they use the same formula to answer every question, then I am not being relevant to the question asked. Neurotransmitters, how they influence human behavior, is of course what the question is. So if I'm just going to leave an animal study and no way show how it matters when it comes to human behavior, I will not be being relevant. So that is one. Another thing is, when it comes to developing the argument, that is key and that is missing in most of the answers which fall in the lower mark band. Students give studies which are not relevant to the argument made, because firstly, most of the times they don't have an argument. They have just selected studies on the basis of this was the study given in my school and the teacher just explained the study and she did not even mention which argument it is supporting. So I had no idea that an argument has to be supported. So it's just a random collection of studies, whichever was done in the school, that they place into the answer. That is not the way of going about it. No doubt your school will select studies and give you. You have to make sure to pick up your textbook or whichever resource is being used and find out what is the argument in relation to which that study is given. You cannot learn studies in isolation. Only that will help you to develop the argument. Another thing is, many students use multiple studies to support the same argument. So when it comes to are neurotransmitters correlational or causative of human behavior, 2-3 studies, that is all the studies in the essay, will be revolving around this argument only. That's a very poor approach. Make sure you have a range of arguments and you have different studies supporting different arguments. Arguments should not be redundant. They should develop the argument. Studies should not be redundant. They should be developing the argument. When you give study after study pertaining to the same argument, you're being highly redundant. So don't do that in your answer. Now coming to Martinez and Kesner study, with this I will show you how you are supposed to cover a study in the ERQ, because unfortunately many students go into unnecessary depth of studies which takes up a lot of the word count and leaves room for hardly anything else, hardly leaves room for critical thinking or more arguments to follow. Secondly, that is why they find the course so challenging. So many students complain about so many studies are there, have to memorize so many details of each study. Well, you don't have to memorize unnecessary details of any study. You should know that. Your IB course is different from course of certain other boards in which you have to memorize word to word of every study. You are not required to do that. Your studies are just supportive in nature. The answer is not focused on the study. Okay, so make sure you cover the study in a way that supports the argument and nothing else. There's no other importance of the study. It is not independently important. It is important only in context of the argument. The best approach to use is whenever you have a study, you cover it in terms of aim, procedure, results and conclusion, omitting any unnecessary details such as how many participants were there, the exact number of participants, exact result which was found in terms of numerical data, or exactly which statistics were calculated. If any of that is relevant to the discussion, say for example you are assessing the methodological quality of the studies, and in that somehow sampling technique, sample size or way of calculating results is very relevant to your main argument, then you can provide those details. Usually these details are not relevant to the argument, so they can be skipped. So now let's look at the example of Martinez and Kesner, how we are following this aim, procedure, conclusion format when it comes to covering this study. Now we make use of every point in the essay to further the points we want to make. Like, let's not have general points which are not linked in any way. Let's have points which are taking the answer further. So let's maximize or optimize every point we are making. For what I mean by this is, like in this study we are looking at how acetylcholine affects spatial memory. The question is asking us how neurotransmitters affect behavior. So why not take the opportunity to use the aim of the study to point out which one neurotransmitter as an example influences one behavior, again as an example. See, earlier I had told you in the introduction, many students would just generally keep on saying, okay, this is a neurotransmitter, this is how it influences this particular behavior. Here, as you are discussing the study, automatically you are giving an example, right, of which neurotransmitter influences which behavior. So you don't need to take it separately. Why waste your word count and why defocus the answer by speaking generally about things which are anyways going to get covered in studies? Just make sure when you're writing it in context of a study, you are covering specifically or pointing out, okay, this is the neurotransmitter and this is the behavior that we are talking about. So it meets two requirements at the same time. You give the aim of the study also, and you give an example of the broader question which is asked. Try to make your answer that way. Many students struggle with word count. The answers become very long. That is because precision is not there. Like I said, in one point only, when you can make 2 points, why use 2 separate points? And even worse, why use different paragraphs to cover those points? Now, in the procedure of Martinez and Kesner, depending which resource you're referring to, a lot of details are possible that you can give. So there were 3 groups, so it was an independent measures design, and this was the quantity of scopolamine given to one set, and this was the quantity of placebo given to another set. It is not required. How is it related to the discussion? So I have covered only as much of the procedure as is required in the discussion. So you can see I have mentioned the manipulation, that is definitely important. So I have mentioned that one group gets scopolamine, which is an antagonist of acetylcholine. I have also mentioned that another group gets physostigmine, which is an agonist of acetylcholine. And I've specified how all of this influences levels of acetylcholine in the brain. I have also specified that there's a control group for comparison. I have mentioned the dependent variable, what is being measured. They were measuring how fast rats can run a maze after acetylcholine levels have either been increased, decreased, or kept constant in the brain. Is anything more than this important to talk about how we are looking at a cause-effect relationship? No, because I have given the cause, the manipulation which is done. I've given the effect, the dependent variable which is being measured. How will other details serve to further the argument which is made? Like, am I talking anything about experimental design? Does it matter how many rats were there in the study? No. So there's no need to include those details. Then I've given the result. And in the result also, what is important is to point out how acetylcholine impacted the time taken to complete the maze. So strictly my result is about that. Those who received the acetylcholine agonist were the fastest to complete the maze. That's it. I don't need to write anything else. Now, when it comes to a result is specific to a study. When it comes to a conclusion is a broader theoretical generalization that we can make from the result. Always make sure your result and conclusion are different. There are too many students who overlap the results and conclusion. That shows that your knowledge is poor. You lose out marks in criterion B if you do that, because you are unable to differentiate between what is a result and what is a conclusion. So conclusion is not about the rats particularly in this study or what treatment they got. Conclusion is about how acetylcholine plays an important role in spatial memory. That is what I have written. If you're finding it a little difficult to follow this answer, I know, because in between I discuss many things, but that is my intention. I want to show you how to write the answer. I don't want you to memorize a specific answer. So in case you're finding it difficult, I am going to be uploading this answer on my website, and I will link it as a free download in the description box below. You can download this answer, you can go through it and then watch this video, or simultaneously. As you are seeing this video, you can pause and keep seeing the answer so that you understand it better. Now coming to how this answer would be marked. This is, like I said, mainly pertaining to criterion C. In criterion C, they want you to cover a research study to support your argument, which has to be relevant and has to develop the argument. Is it relevant? Yes. It is talking about one specific neurotransmitter and a behavior which is affected by it. Is it developing the argument? Yes, because it is showing a cause-effect relationship. So definitely it will score highly. In this criterion, have they asked you to give as many details as possible of the study? No. So that is not the approach that you need to take. Now coming to criterion D, critical thinking. When it comes to critical thinking, the gravest mistake which students make is to critically evaluate only studies which they have given in the essay. So they just memorize formulaically 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses of the study, and they will just present it, regardless of whether that strength or weakness is relevant to the overall discussion being made or not. See, what is there? Just like your study has to be relevant to the argument, even the evaluation of the study has to be relevant to the argument made. If you take any study in your syllabus, you can evaluate it in terms of whatever acronym you have remembered. So you've remembered GRAVE, you can evaluate it in terms of GRAVE. If you do that, you will find a number of strengths and weaknesses of every study. Now, can you devote your ERQ to go on elaborating on strengths and weaknesses of every study, regardless of whether those evaluation points are relevant to the argument? You cannot do that. So make sure you take up only those evaluation points which are relevant to the argument made. Other evaluation points will be considered as trivial in the context of evaluation. For example, supposing if I say that only these many rats were there in the study, so that is why results are not generalizable to the larger population of rats. Is it relevant to my argument? Am I trying to generalize the results to rats that I should be talking about this? One underlying theme or overarching theme in your answer throughout has to be that every point has to be relevant in some way to what you're talking about. There is no scope for irrelevant details in an ERQ. Always keep that in mind. So in criterion D, if we see the 5 to 6 mark band, to attain that, you have to firstly show good, well-developed critical thinking. So well-developed critical thinking automatically means it cannot be arbitrary. It cannot be any strength or weakness from the top of your head that you are giving. And secondly, it has to be of relevant areas. That means whatever is the argument, it has to be relevant to that. And it has to be consistently well-developed. Again, what some students will do is 1 or 2 evaluation points which they make will be relevant to the argument. The remaining will just be to cover whatever target they have in their mind. For example, they've decided I have to only cover 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses. So then maybe 1 strength, 1 weakness is relevant to the argument and the rest of it is just for the sake of it. It has to be consistently well developed. Every point has to support the other and support the larger theme which is there. So let's see with the example of Martinez and Kesner study. It's like at the same time how we can evaluate the study as well as the broader argument which has been made. In the Martinez and Kesner study, we cannot doubt the cause-effect relationship which is established. Why we cannot doubt it? Because there's a clear cause which is delineated and a clear effect, and a laboratory setting has been used to make sure that extraneous variables do not interfere in the cause-effect relationship. Now, can I just write evaluation like this? Like, can I just say it was controlled, so there's clear cause-effect relationship? Definitely not, because I have to show well-developed critical thinking. My critical thinking is well developed only if it can be contextualized to the study, or only if it can be made relevant to the study. Simply saying, when I say that there's a clear IV and DV, I have to point out which is that IV and DV. So the IV is the levels of acetylcholine. So we know that levels have either been heightened or reduced, and the dependent variable is the time taken to complete the maze. Always, wherever you are using evaluation, so be it your ERQ or be it on paper 3 when you are answering that unseen passage, every evaluation point always has to be contextualized to the study or the topic on which, the theory on which you are making that point. It can never be general or isolated. So there is a cause effect, there is manipulation of IV, that's too general. That is something you could say about any study that is an experiment. How are you showing that your critical thinking is applicable to the context? Do you know how to use your critical thinking? You have to show that. So make sure you're using wording from the Martinez and Kesner study. You're pointing out what is the IV and DV. And then the point is effective. Now, not only that, okay, you've pointed out that there is manipulation of IV and that shows there is a clear relation. You've contextualized it. Also, you have to make it relevant to the broader argument made. Right? What we are arguing from the beginning, the first argument is all about, are neurotransmitters having a causal effect on behavior, or are they just having a correlational effect? So now what you see is we are able to say that there is a causal effect if we look at this study, right? So we are seeing a clear cause-effect relationship of one neurotransmitter on one behavior. So that is how it is aligning with the argument we have made before. So how you cover an evaluation point, just to summarize, you make the point, you contextualize it in the study, and then you relate it to the broader argument made. But on the other hand, we are not very sure of this causal relationship because the study has been done on animals. Human brains are more complex than that of rats. So no doubt we are seeing a causal relationship, but it is highly possible that this causal relationship is applicable only to a lower species like rats, given that their brains are much simpler than that of humans. Again, to contextualize this point or elaborate further, because human brains have an intricate system of neurotransmitter interactions. Humans have far too many neurotransmitters in their brain compared to rats, and these neurotransmitters interact with each other. They depend on each other for their release and reception. So it is unlikely that what is found in a simple brain like that of a rat would apply to a complex brain. Not only that, the point is further complicated by noticing that humans are also influenced by many socio-cognitive factors when it comes to their behavior. So no doubt there can be some neurotransmitter being released in the brain in case of a human that could influence their behavior, but it would get modulated by environmental factors. We can specify some of those, such as stress, emotional state of the person, which is a cognitive factor, or it can in fact even get superseded by those factors. So when we look at humans, maybe that neurotransmitter behavior relationship does not hold true at all once we look at how socio-cognitive factors are influencing humans. So it might be only an animal phenomenon that has been seen. A poor answer that would fall for criterion D in the mark band of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 would be the one which would just evaluate the study and say that because it's been done on animals, it is not generalizable to humans. But a superior answer which falls in the 5 to 6 category is the one which relates this point that generalizability is poor because of use of animals to the larger argument which is being made, and goes in detail to show why this is a problem. Why in the case of humans the same things would not be found which is found in the case of animals. So an answer which just gives a general point in critical thinking, such as animals are used so generalizability is poor, falls in the 1 to 2 mark band. An answer which elaborates a little on this point and explains why this is an issue will fall on the 3 to 4 mark band. But an answer which does both of this and relates it to the argument made will fall in the 5 to 6 mark band. So make sure you have all these features in your critical thinking. Now another thing we see in this answer is this part of the answer which we have seen so far has covered one argument. We have to bring out now the next argument. When it comes to the next argument, why not again link it or dive into that argument in relation to this one? Like I said, avoid as far as possible to have your essay points just randomly being brought about in the essay. Try to relate every point with the previous one made. So in the same way, the arguments that you are making, make sure that one argument somehow is stemming out from the previous or is standing in opposition to the previous or is along the lines of the previous one. Means somehow bring about the connection between the arguments made so that your essay looks pretty holistic. That is what makes for a good essay. Okay, and also one more thing is when it comes to criterion E, that is the only one I have not discussed so far. Many students have this misbelief that criterion E applies only to the conclusion of the answer, which is not true. Criterion E is about organization and clarity, as you know. It has to be throughout the answer. It cannot be only in the conclusion. So far, whatever we have seen in this answer, it's clear. Why is it clear? Because if we see the 2 mark requirement in that, it shows clarity throughout the response. Every concept has been explained. I'll just give you 1 or 2 examples. The argument has been explained first of all. In the study, what is an antagonist, what is an agonist, like even the smaller concepts have been explained in a way that, say, someone who's not from a psychology background would be able to understand what is happening in the study. So micro details have been explained, and critical thinking has also been explained in the sense it has been contextualized and elaborated. So there is clarity throughout the answer. As you read the answer, you feel the learner knows what he's talking about, and there is organization. There is an order to things. A larger argument is placed first, then it is elaborated upon, then a study is given in relation to that argument, and then the study is evaluated only after it has been explained, and the evaluation has been linked back to the original argument made. So organization is very clear to grasp and it is very prominent. Okay, So this answer will keep on scoring on all the 5 criterias already. And then further, even the other paragraphs are written in the same way. We'll be able to go across them quicker because they're similar to this one, and they will also score on all the 5 criteria. Now once that argument is done with, that neurotransmitters perhaps do not cause behaviors in humans, I have linked it to the next argument, which is on reductionism. Because the same argument, another side of it, or we can say in continuation of it, is the fact then that the study of neurotransmitters and the impact on behavior becomes reductionist. So why not take that next? It's so relevant to the argument made previously. When we talk about cause and effect, we are making things reductionist to make them scientific. So the argument directly bears on what we've been discussing previously. Now I could have taken the other study, I think, yeah, that's by Antonova, which has been done on humans. It is similar to the Martinez and Kesner study, which has been done on rats. But what would happen if I take the Antonova study? It would be a repetition, in the sense it would be 2 studies, Martinez and Kesner and Antonova, which would be supporting one and the same argument, which is not a very good approach here, like I told you. Why go on elaborating on the same argument? For one thing, that won't help you to cover a range of arguments. In the end, you might have written so much and taken up so much of the word count that you don't have enough to bring about another argument. You don't have enough word count left. Another thing would be, you would not be showing your knowledge. You would be showing a very limited side of your knowledge. The examiner would get the impression that you know of only one argument related to neurotransmitters. That is why you're going on elaborating. Also, you know only of one neurotransmitter and one behavior, which is acetylcholine and spatial memory. So when you have an opportunity to show diversity and to develop different arguments, do not restrict yourself to go on elaborating on only one. So what I've done is, for the reductionism versus holism argument, which is next, again I have explained the argument, but in a little different way. Like as such, it's already explained in the previous paragraph if you go through it. But with the context of the study, again I'll be explaining it a little bit after writing the study. So that is also one approach which you can take. That is why also I insist that don't have a formulaic way of writing the answers, because then this is what happens. You are just busy following the template. You're just worried about, am I meeting the formula or not? Just take the answer where the flow of the answer takes you. So if at some point you're feeling after the study is explained, you'll be able to explain your argument better, you can organize in that way. If some place you feel before the study is made, it is important to elaborate on the argument, you'll be able to do it that way. So write in a way that is more suitable to the answer being written, rather than just trying to follow some typecast way of writing. So for this argument, I have taken the Crockett et al. Study. Crockett et al. Study, as you know, is about neurotransmission and prosocial behavior. Again, only relevant details I have described. It looks lengthy, but somehow it's important because the study does have some dimensions to it. Okay, so where a study requires more of elaboration, you can do that. Where it requires less, do that. But again, I have not given unnecessary details. Just because I've covered more at length does not mean anything and everything about the study I have written. So again, I've primarily explained the manipulation, how participants were administered citalopram so that serotonin can be increased in their brain, and how the same participants in another condition were administered placebo. Here you will see I have mentioned double-blind design. And it might seem odd to you, or it might seem like an unnecessary detail, but there is a reason for putting in this detail into the study, because I am going to be using it in evaluation. So always the points which I give in the study to meet criterion C should be relevant to the evaluation that is coming ahead and to the discussion being made earlier. Other than that, I don't need to give details. So yes, if some micro detail is there which helps in the evaluation further, I can include that. Okay, then I've also explained the dependent variable. The only reason why this study is covered in a little more length is because this is about moral dilemma, and I need to give an example of moral dilemma to point out how prosocial behavior is exactly being influenced by serotonin. So how it is being influenced. I'm not able to explain how pro-social behavior is being seen without giving this example. That is why I am giving it. So as much detail I am giving as is necessary to show the connection between the neurotransmitter and the behavior. So I've given the example of the trolley problem in the Crockett study because that is relevant here. Then I've explained the results. Serotonin levels increase, then there was more tendency to not harm a person and that way show pro-social behavior to that person. Conclusion, again, like I said, has to be a theoretical generalization. So overall it shows that serotonin does modulate emotional reactions and thereby pro-social behavior. So this study I have covered in the same way that I had covered Martinez and Kesner, and I also explained to you why it looks more elaborate. In criterion C, again it will fall in the 5 to 6 mark band easily because a lot of relevant details are given and it is relevant to the overall argument being made, which is about how studies can be reductionist. To explain my point further about reductionism and to evaluate the study, I have explained how it has been done in a controlled setting which is devoid of any type of real elements which are found to be present when people are making moral judgments. So in a Crockett type of study in the laboratory, when I am deciding should I divert the trolley or not, I am not influenced by any emotions, by any support or pressure that might be coming from other people who are in the same situation. Unlike what would be the case if really there was a trolley that I was driving or I had to decide whether to divert the trolley or not. That real situation would be far more pressurizing and emotional in nature compared to what is done in this study. So in critical thinking, I'm talking about the lack of ecological validity in this study in a way that makes it very reductionist. Again, I do point out the strength of the study, that there is manipulation of citalopram, and that is why there is a clear cause-effect relationship. No doubt, like serotonin has been manipulated to show that it has a direct bearing on pro-social behavior. But unfortunately, because it has been done in a very restricted laboratory environment, we are still not sure how real elements such as social pressure would modulate this cause-effect relationship. We are also not sure whether serotonin at all would be a cause of pro-social behavior when socio-cognitive factors are present. For example, when I become very emotional, it is possible some other neurotransmitter would take the place of serotonin and determine what I do, or just my thinking would decide what I do, regardless of what neurotransmitters are being released. Now again, to reiterate the point I made previously, a poor answer which would fall in the 1 to 2 mark band for criterion D, critical thinking, would just talk about ecological validity being a weakness in this study. An answer falling in the 3 to 4 mark band would elaborate a little and point out what is unrealistic about the study. But a 5 to 6 marker answer would do all of this. It would show that ecological validity is poor, point out what is artificial about the study, and link the study to the broader discussion argument which is being made, and that is what you get to see over here. Following that, I want to talk about the applicability of neurotransmitters, like how they help in bringing about treatment of people who are suffering from various disorders. But I need not do that in an isolated way, in the sense I don't need to do it in a way that has no bearing with what has been answered previously. So what we can do is to link it to what is said previously. First of all, we say, regardless of whether there's a causal relationship or not, they are helpful. These type of studies are useful, and investigating neurotransmitter and behavior is definitely not irrelevant. So here what I'm trying to show is the previous two arguments are important to think about how neurotransmitters might actually have a very limited influence on behavior. But that does not mean that we are calling out the whole research on neurotransmission as useless, or we are saying that these type of studies should not be done. Rather, they should be done, and what is the reason why they should be done is what I'm bringing about in this argument, because they have the potential to treat mental disorders. Here I have picked up the study by Freed et al., which shows how these neurotransmitters can be modulated by drugs, and that can help to overcome a problem as serious as Parkinson's disease. And I'm sorry, it's not by drugs, it is by transplantation of stem cells. Now, to get into that study, which is going to be supporting my argument, again narrowing down the argument a little, I point out that the exact mechanisms are still under investigation. Like how exactly, even if neurotransmitters are not causes, still how they are influencing behavior, we are not very sure. But therapeutic rigor is there. It is sure to bring about therapeutic benefits, that we are sure, because immense research is telling us that that is the case. And then I point out that Fried et al. Is one example of all the research being done in this area. That is how I connect and begin with that study. Coming to the Fried study, again the same format: aims, procedure, results, conclusion. So in the aim, I'm able to bring about one more neurotransmitter. In the first argument, I spoke about acetylcholine. In the second, serotonin. In the third, I'm talking about dopamine. In the first, the behavior was spatial memory. In the second, the behavior was prosocial behavior or moral judgment. And in the third, it is going to be Alzheimer's disease, overcoming of Alzheimer's disease. So you can see how I have brought about 3 neurotransmitters and their effects on 3 different behaviors throughout the answer. But I've done it with the help of arguments, with the help as a discussion standpoint, bringing about various aspects of neurotransmission. I have not done this in isolation. So I have not memorized, okay, first let me talk about this. So I'll talk about what is acetylcholine, what is spatial memory, give the study by Martinez and Kesner. Then I'll talk about what is serotonin, what is push. That is not the way of writing. It's not a describe answer. It's a discuss answer. So an argument has to be at the heart of everything. Okay, so coming back to the Fried et al. Study, I have given the aim, then I have given the relevant procedure, which is how there were 2 groups of participants with Parkinson's disease. I've also taken a moment or one sentence to explain what is Parkinson's disease to meet criterion B and show my knowledge. I have also explained how one of the groups had a surgery which gave them new dopamine stem cells, and another group which underwent sham surgery. Again, there are too many details on the Fried et al. Study, and you would note there are many ethical considerations revolving it. You would note that there are many details given, such as from where did they get the stem cells from aborted fetuses, things like that. Are they relevant over here? No. Is my argument about the ethics of these studies? No. Would they be relevant in an ethical considerations answer? Yes. So those are not details that I should be covering here. Keep in mind that criterion A, which is there, focus on the question, that also applies throughout the answer, just like criterion E applies throughout the answer. So nowhere can you become unfocused and get into irrelevant details. So what is relevant over here when it comes to how it helps overcome the problem of Parkinson's is to talk about what treatment was given to the participants, and that is only what I have covered. In the results, we see yes, dopamine production increased in the brains of those who got the stem cells, because the stem cells help to create the dopamine producing cells, and ultimately we do see a reduction in their symptoms. Again, if you see in the textbook, you will find that there is a specific percentage given, I think like 28% reduction in symptoms. You can specify such things, but they are largely irrelevant, and that is why I have not written about them. So I have made my arguments, and then coming to the conclusion of this answer. Okay, now here you might wonder why critical thinking paragraph is not there. It is not very much required, that is why. My whole point in application to, or application of the neurotransmitter to resolving problems is clearly seen in this study. Like if I was to give the strengths and weaknesses, what would I talk about? Like I would say, okay, the study is valid, not valid. It's clearly valid, and because again there is manipulation which is very obvious. I've spoken about that in previous paragraphs. And if I talk about weakness, like say that it is applicable to younger patients, they recovered more, not the older ones, not very relevant to the argument being made, because the argument is that it does benefit people. Parkinson's is something that largely affects older people. I'm not saying it does not affect younger people, it does, But if it is showing promise in treating older people, my argument is proved, or the point I'm making is proved, that if we look into neurotransmitters, they do help to understand how behavior is influenced and how mental disorders or physical disorders can be overcome. So here what I want to bring about is, again, some students have this mindset that just because critical thinking is required, so again they go by the template approach. Like if you see, everything underlying their approach is a template or a format which they have made. So it has to only be argument, study, evaluation, argument, study, evaluation. When an evaluation is not required, neither is there any further argument that I'm going to link it to, nor is there anything that's not obvious in the description of the study that the evaluation will pertain to. The study is like self-speaking, it's self-obvious. I forgot the term we use, self-declarative type of study. Then what is the need to bring about a critical thinking paragraph which is not going to add anything special to what is already said? The study by itself is providing knowledge also, like it's meeting criterion B. It's a study, so it's meeting criterion C. And by itself, by showing in the results that the treatment is helpful, it is meeting criterion D as well. It's showing critical thinking as well. There's no need for any further critical thinking. So that is why I have not elongated the answer further by including a separate criterion D paragraph. Also, when I say students have templates or formats in mind, one typical template is this particular paragraph will meet A, this paragraph will meet criterion B, this one will meet C. This also does not work. It's a poor approach. Like I told you, every criterion is applying throughout the answer. So why are you trying to dedicate different paragraphs to different criteria? Don't do that. Rather, keep on writing, like I have told you, in a relevant manner. Automatically you will end up meeting all the criteria in all the paragraphs. Having said that, let's come to the conclusion. From the answer, what we can conclude is that neurotransmitters do influence behaviors. There's no denying that. Only what is there, because there are too many experimental studies, we are able to see causal relationships which fail when we try to link them in the real world. They are reductionist in nature, which makes their generalizability limited. Like we're not able to have faith that really neurotransmitters would cause behaviors, because they study neurotransmitters and behavior in way too much isolation. Nevertheless, even if neurotransmitters and behavior relationship is reductionist, there is great applicability of the use of neurotransmitters, like they're beneficial. And there's no denying that it is worthwhile to study the topic of neurotransmission. So what is this all about? You'd realize it's a summary of whatever I have said earlier. So good conclusion just summarizes the broad argument, helps to meet criterion E largely, where we are showing that there is clarity in our answer. We are able to bring about the essence of all the arguments that we have made, and definitely from an organization point of view, it gives a good finish to the answer, because it recaps whatever has been said and briefly helps the reader to just get an overview of whatever had been said and to just like consolidate all the information given in their mind. So conclusion is more or less a summary of all the arguments that have been made. Many students try to also mention one-line conclusion for each of the studies in the broader conclusion. That is not very important, because in discussion the focus is on argument. No one is interested in the individual studies independent of the arguments being made. So when an answer is all about arguments, the conclusion should be summarizing those, not individual studies or individual theories, if that is the answer which is coming. So individual theories which are there, that should not be in focus. Then you lose out on criterion A. Focus would not be much. The word count is the last thing I can talk about. Maximum word count for an ERQ is 1200. You shouldn't exceed that. So this is well within. And overall, I would say, regardless of which answer it is, like not only this one, ERQs should be somewhere, in my opinion, more than 1000 words, because if they are less, generally what is found, why are they less? Because either the arguments are less, that is why, or the critical thinking is not detailed enough. It just touches the surface. So like I said, very generic points are there without making them relevant. So in those cases, we find that word counts are less. Somehow, if you are a writer like who's exceptionally brilliant in the sense in very very few words you're able to give good elaborations, then it suffices that you write less than 1000 words. Otherwise, not just for the sake of writing more than 1000 words, but to be detailed enough and to cover a range of arguments, try to keep your answer above 1000 words. And again, that's something that will happen automatically. You won't have to put special effort into extending the word count if you follow all the advice that I have given in writing an ERQ in this video. That is all I have to share today. If you still have any doubts or questions on how to write and discuss ERQ, or even about the neurotransmitters or biological ERQs in particular, you can leave a comment in the box below. Any questions related to the video, I will answer only in the comment section. If you're looking for classes or tuition for your IBPsychology course, especially HL students, I take SL as well, but HL students need quite a bit of help, then you can contact me on my phone number which is given below, or my email ID. I'm thinking of doing one thing, and most probably I'll do it. The same answer, I will just mark out from a criteria point of view in a shorter video, maybe 10 or 15 minute video, and I'll upload it, in which just if you want a summary of whatever I've said in this, or you strictly want to see only scoring without any suggestions on my part on how to write the answer, you'll be able to see in that video. So I'll try to follow with that video also very soon. As of today, this is all I have to share. Let me know what your doubts are in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.